Good afternoon. It's not morning. It is about 3:45 in the afternoon. And what happened is that I got in the mail the antiquarian copy of the Portland transcript that I'd been expecting. Got it rather early from Texas, of all things. October 5, 1839. And on the back is a star-signed essay by Matthew. There's no question this is Matthew's work. This is his go-to signature and had been off and on since 1830 or so. It's what he used to sign the reviews and essays in the New York Tribune from 1844 to mid-1846, which were mistakenly attributed to Margaret Fuller. And he used it many other times afterwards, after Fuller had died in a tragic nautical accident. He used it, wrote exactly the same way, used it up to 1873, I think is the last one that I have in the transcript. So what I'm going to do is read this essay. But first, before I get to that, my article about A Christmas Carol and Charles Dickens and Matthew Franklin Whittier has now been published in the e-zine Real Paranormal Magazine UK. And then after a month, I am going to post that article in its original format, and I'll tell you why in a minute, on Academia EDU, and then I start emailing professors and letting them know that it's there and that I'll give them the link to it, and we'll see what happens. I called quite a few more of their emails today, going through these professor bios on these different university websites, and I got a couple ringers. One of them specializes in A Christmas Carol itself, gives talks about A Christmas Carol, and another one was in charge of giving tours in Lowell, Massachusetts, where Dickens visited briefly in 1842. So I'm going to adjust the screen because it's something I actually forgot to do. There we go. Hope I didn't make you seasick on that one. There's going to be some nonplussed people. The guy who's expert in A Christmas Carol looks rather large. So I don't think he lives in Maine, thank goodness. Hopefully he's a big teddy bear. We'll find out, I guess. But really, it's going to really anger them. If the first maybe 1/4 of this article demonstrates that Dickens was not a nice guy and that he did not have the character necessary to write A Christmas Carol, a spiritually inspired work, and that he was in fact a plagiarist. So that probably won't get past that first 1/4 of the paper, I'm guessing. They'll be so offended that they will, click off and maybe report me for spam or something like that. I doubt they will read the rest of the evidence. But I don't know, there's a mischievous part of me that wants to get the truth out, and wants to cross swords with people. And there's another part of me that feels kind of sorry for these people because they're heavily, heavily invested in a mistake, in a lie, that it's not their fault, And they're actually fans of Matthew Franklin Whittier and Abby Poyen Whittier. They just don't know that that's who they're fans of, see? So it's very poignant. The example I give in my written blog, the metaphor that I use is, suppose that someone was stolen from his parents as a little tiny kid, and he doesn't remember his parents, and the kidnappers raise him. And then when he's 14, his parents catch up to him, and the law comes and takes him away from the kidnappers and gives him to his rightful parents. Well, he's going to be very upset about that because in his subjective world, he's being taken away from his parents and given to these strangers. See, well, that's what this is like for these poor professors that are going to, receive, either if they don't read my article, they'll hear about it one way or another. And I do have some sympathy for them. Now, this article on the back page of the Portland transcript, first of all, I've told you that Charles Isley was Matthew's friend. And in these pages are coming apart. This apparently came from a bound volume. In the To Readers and Correspondence section, he says near the bottom, "Shall we not hear again from the writer of the essay on our last page?" Well, he knows darn well who wrote that, I'm assuming, but that's his way of asking Matthew for some more copy. So it suggests to me that if I get into this volume, I'll see that he hadn't contributed for some period of time. Well, that's because, he and Abby were struggling, with her tuberculosis was really flaring up by this time. And he really wasn't in a position to write very much. But somehow he managed to write this. Now, what this is, first and foremost, this is a spiritual person's attack on scientific materialism. So what it means is that back in 1839 and today in 2001, I was engaged in the same fight. Back then, it was just sort of, materialism was just sort of rearing its ugly head, see? It really wasn't accepted the way it is now in society. As a matter of fact, quite the reverse. People assumed that, God was real and the creation was from him, and that God's presence was, imminent in creation, depending on how esoteric one was. Now it's quite different. So, people like me have lost the fight, seemingly. But people like me are fighting back, as you may know if you've looked into this. And we will prevail because materialism will have had its day. And this is the way with all errors. Once you go down that road, you have to go all the way down. It's like an alcoholic. He has to hit rock bottom. Our culture has to hit the rock bottom of materialism before we will be ready to let go of it. It's an addiction. And you can apply the addiction model to it straight across the board. Works beautifully. Except you got to put reincarnation in because it's not just one lifetime. See? So that's what this is. He's talking about the beauty in the world is not simply a matter of natural selection, which I don't know if Darwin had come out yet in 1839. I don't believe so. But see what I know about. I only know history related to Matthew. I don't know history overall. See. But the ideas were coming, see, they were coming out. And the idea was that the universe was just material things, little blocks of stuff, and you could go smaller and smaller, but you'd still find little blocks of stuff. It was just an accident, basically, that it was beautiful. Well, Matthew knew better. Now, the other thing about this article, before I read it, is that this is as much of Abby's instruction in mysticism as Matthew, the Christian and philosopher, was able to absorb. He would understand more, I think, in the future, but he is basically trying to take what Abby has taught him of esoteric teachings, and he's trying to amalgamate them or somehow integrate them with his understanding of philosophy and religion. Now, you have to keep in mind where these two people are coming from. Abby was Catholic. Her father was French, and she was being raised French, so she undoubtedly was Catholic. In Catholicism, there's respect for mysticism, much more than in Protestant denominations. So she was free to study the lives of the saints and the mystical states of the saints, like St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross and St. Francis and so on. And it was not verboten for her to delve into that area. But her mother was Scottish, and she knew the old ways. Need I say more? So Abby was half Catholic mystic and half Wiccan. See, that's what you see in A Christmas Carol. It is not a ghost story written by a supposed social reformer. That's the way people assume. And only worldly people could come away with that conclusion. This is the problem. You have worldly people deciding for all of us what this is. See, well, they don't understand what it is because they don't have the training in mysticism, except the ones that aren't interested in it, I guess. So that was Abby. And then Matthew was raised Quaker. So he had some exposure to mysticism, as I said recently, with John Woolman and George Fox and William Penn and so on. But still, I think he came from a more traditional Christian background, because it appears to me that the Whittier family was really more traditional Christian than they were Quaker. That's my conclusion. His mother was interested in esoteric things, but she was superstitious, so I think her grasp of it was kind of superficial. And that actually turned Matthew away from all things woo-woo for quite some time, until he realized that Abby was at a whole different level of understanding than his mother had been. So that gives you a little background. Now, there's two ways I could approach this. I could read it straight through, or I could stop and make comments. And I was going to read it straight through, but I think I'll stop and comment on it as I go. I think because otherwise I'd have to go back and try to remember, and I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to take my glass of water and bring it way over here away from this newspaper and mindfully set it back down. I do not want to spill anything on this. I'm going to give you a couple close-ups, at least of the title and the star signature. If I don't flub up too badly, I won't give you any more, because when I've been reading this poetry and I make mistakes or I say the wrong word or something, I've been going in and fixing that, and I cover it with close-ups of the text. See, well, the last one, a 3 days ago was, it was so bad. It was so hard to read. And so I made so many mistakes that basically it's all, you don't know how many cuts there are in the timeline and how many replacements are in there. It took me, I worked an 18-hour day when I recorded it. And then I did another almost whole day of editing on that. So this just gives you some idea of the work I've been putting into these things. And there's still mistakes. I saw one today when I was looking at it. So I'm going to stop and talk about it. And I probably will not try to cut in visuals of this unless I just make some horrendous mistake. He says, "We are placed in a beautiful world, surrounded by objects to create pleasure and admiration. How admirably fitted for the delight and happiness of man are all the works of nature. She assumes every possible form and color, and taxes herself constantly to gratify and please man, nor is she unsuccessful in her attempts. The earth, her temple, the grand theater of her acts, she carpets with enlivening green. She spreads out every shade, yet all so charmingly arranged and blended as highly to gratify rather than to disturb and confuse. She has also ornamented it with every form of vegetation, and animated it with living beings to please the eye and the ear. She annually changes her attire to meet the changing wishes of man, her lord. Once she decorates herself with opening buds. Her mantle bears a tinge of green. She promises," it says and apparel, I think it means an apparel, "of a darker, richer green, in which she soon appears with a garland of gay, beautiful flowers. This dress she soon lays by for one of imposing grandeur, of various dark and mingled hues. Shortly again her green and shaded carpet is exchanged for one of spotless white, while she herself wears a habit of dark brown, undecorated. She has overarched her dominions with a mild blue concave, sparkling with gems, a display of beauty, italicized, with grandeur. Here is one of nature's most noble and most successful efforts to please." Now that, of course, is Abby's favorite, is the stars, so he emphasized that. She's reading this, I'm sure that she gives comments. "How sweet and beautiful are the harmonious lays of nature's songsters." And this is another one of Abby's favorites. The stars and the songbirds are her favorites. "She did not fail in her laudable attempts to please the ear of man. To the cheerful man she has given the gay and merry song of the lark. To the sad or disappointed, the plaintive lay of the nightingale. To the proud and ambitious, the wild scream of the soaring eagle. For the affectionate and loving, she prepares the mild, tender tone of the robin, and for the exact ear, the measured song of the whippoorwill. How delightful, how various the music with which munificent nature has furnished us. There is a beauty in the rolling and lashing of the ocean's mighty waves, rocked by omnipotence. There is beauty in the calm, unruffled surface of the lake. There is beauty in the craggy cliff, over which foam and roar eternal waters, and where the hardy pine braves the thunder of heaven. There is beauty in the smooth, extended meadow, where the noiseless track of a gentle stream alone breaks the monotony of the scene. There is beauty in the sturdy oak, and in the tender, fragile blossom of the night-blooming cereus, in the commanding form and majestic mien of the lion, and in the slender proportion and nimble leap of the goat. Whether we turn to the heights above or to the depths below, beautiful forms, motions, colors, and sounds meet us." So this is something that is remarked upon in every nature program you've ever watched. David Attenborough and Geographic and, Smithsonian, and they all remark on the beauty of nature as though it was an accident. See, well, it isn't. It can't possibly be an accident. Now, he hasn't brought God into this yet. We're getting to that in just a minute. But just to show that there is something about nature that is beautiful to the mind and sensibilities of man, and that the two are somehow interconnected. Now, he hasn't pursued that. Rumi would go even further. But so far we see that this cannot be a simply material accident. It's impossible. And if you look further, you look at these nature shows, or you go out yourself, you'll find humor, you'll find intelligence, you'll find all kinds of manifestations of the higher mind reflected in nature. Now, this is something Abby taught him, and that he readily picked up because he felt the same way. He was also a nature mystic, I believe, from past lives. And the two of them were just like this. Now, when Candace Zollner, the psychic, said that they were of one mind or one accord, or however she put it, this is what she was talking about. They were totally on the same wavelength when it came to these things. And that's why they would go out in nature and they would both, achieve mystical ecstasy, out in nature, seeing the beauty of God's creation. Now he says, but see, what he hasn't done is to go where Rumi goes with it. He hasn't said that these are manifestations of God's attributes, that these are archetypes, that these are ideas, and with capital I, ideals and ideas from a higher sphere. He hasn't gone to the Platonic level of this yet, if you want to stick with Western philosophy. He's only just said that they seem to be made for man's appreciation. That's his introduction here. Now, how far we're going to go, I don't know, because where Abby would take it is that the attributes of God are reflected in the world of nature and in man and in his consciousness. And it is those things in the outward world which awaken the inward consciousness in man. And they are there to, the reflections of God's attributes are there to awaken man to a consciousness of God's attributes, God being the true self, so from within. See, well, that's true mysticism. He's not quite there yet. Let's see how close he gets. How infinitely indebted is man to the God of all nature for that mind which enjoys, which sees and feels this beauty. What would man be without the pleasant and delightful objects of nature? Where would be the rapture, the adoration, which her works now excite in him? Deprive the material world of beauty, and you wrong the immortal mind. You give an offense for which no recompense can be made, while the mind dwells in clay. But the question returns, what would beauty be without the mind? We do not suppose that the waving grass, the murmuring rivulet, or the gentle moon are conscious of giving or receiving delight from themselves. What but the human mind delights in their loveliness? Let no conscious being exist save the Almighty, who continues the material world now as now it is. But what does it avail? For what is all this expense? There is no perception of beauty or harmony, no, and cannot be until the mysterious mind of man, which alone can perceive and admire, is introduced to the scene. Senseless matter is so fashioned, so made as to produce emotions of beauty in the human mind. I'm going to repeat that. Senseless matter is so fashioned, so made as to produce emotions of beauty in the human mind. This divine principle sees, rejoices, and admires. Here is a subject for the philosopher. Here are cause and effect, deeply interesting in their respective natures and in their practical and moral influence on man's immortal principle. He's come that close to saying what I just said. So Abby has taught him, this higher mysticism, which he dare not quite, it's not that he doesn't understand it necessarily, but he dare not quite go there in an 1839 public newspaper. See, he'd be driven out of town, if he said that God is within and the same God's attributes manifest in the material world, which is a shadow of God's existence. You can't go there, but he's gotten pretty close. What is beauty? Let me get a little water here. I'm drying out. What is beauty in the material world? Every rational being knows and rejoices in the knowledge, but who can tell? What is its color? Is it the glossy black of the raven or the snowy white of the swan? Do I need to mention, I need to talk about that, or shall we move on? Let it be the former, and you must deny that the swan is beautiful. What is beauty's size? If it be the immense fabric of Grecian architecture, the tiny hummingbird has no claim on the lover of beauty. Equally impossible is it to state beauty's form and sound. It cannot be limited. How weak would the most experienced and pleasing sculptor appear who should attempt to carve an image of beauty? Is not proportion, all caps, small caps, beauty? This cannot be. Then what must be the proportion in the parts of a tree to constitute beauty? If either the spreading elm with its numerous and arching branches, or the palm tree, an erect towering column with a tuft of foliage surmounting it, be acknowledged the standard, the other is certainly very far from beautiful. But to such a verdict no one will consent. May we not then rest in the belief that beauty is a distinct quality of matter? No, this may not be, for then man must be the possessor of a sixth sense, through whose operation this quality communicates with the mind, which is an absurd supposition. I'm not so sure it is. Admitting it, however, the effect produced on the mind must be a sensation, whereas from beauty the mind receives a complex emotion very different from sensation. Beauty may not be defined. It is a conception of which the mind is the sole creator and possessor. Yet the Almighty has in kindness invested matter with the power to enliven and quicken this conception. Mighty as are the faculties of the mind, you require too much of it if you ask what beauty is in the material world. It knows and feels, but cannot tell. So now we have something intuitive that's beyond the intellect, some sense that's been granted to man to appreciate the beauty in nature, to respond to that beauty in a way that creates an experience of it in oneself, in one's own mind. The action of the mind, when a beautiful object is presented to it, is very interesting. No sooner does the eye see or the ear hear than the soul is aroused to activity. It is delighted. It rejoices. The imagination is invariably awakened. The visible object is made to assume new forms, or to enter into the composition of new and more pleasing wholes. It often receives additional charms from the pleasant chain of associations which binds it to the soul. The mind, receiving from it emotions of pleasure, takes it into its secret chambers, and by its own transforming and creative power, possesses it of new attractions, and thus the beautiful works of nature become the friends, the delight of the soul. Hence, in the roaring of the cataract, the lays of nature's songsters, the tender petals or mossy calyx of the rose, and in whatever else is beautiful, the soul finds companions, communion with whom is gratifying and exalting, signed with the star. So, this is high philosophy. It wouldn't be taken seriously today because it's not materialistic. See, that materialism became a fad, and then it became the rage. It was convenient. It's very convenient to embrace materialism because you get rid of all moral responsibility as soon as you do that. Unless you're so inclined to be existentially, nice and to find existential meaning where there wasn't any, and you decide to be a nice person and dedicate yourself to philanthropy and liberal causes, basically there's no moral sense in materialism. There's no grounding in it. Whereas, here we have an inherent spirituality and an inherent morality in what nature awakens the mind to, and a purpose in it, So this is actually very deep philosophy. I won't say sophisticated because it's, truth is not sophisticated. My guru, Meher Baba, said that philosophy was a simple thing made difficult. And I see that so clearly demonstrated in these philosophers, in these uh, academicians' bio pages and these websites. When I go to these colleges and read these bios, these people are spinning their wheels and they're trying to outdo the other people and they're trying to justify having a job and they're trying to get awards, and show that they're more sophisticated than the last guy, see? And it's all just stuff. It's like Dr. Digg. I've told you that Matthew created a caricature of academia called Dr. E. Gertie Digg, which was mistakenly attributed by the editor to a career academician named Benjamin Drew. There was no such thing. That was Matthew's. Long story. I won't go down that road. But this is literally what I'm finding in these websites. And, I don't mean to be disparaging. I'm being literal. This is literally what I'm finding. These people who are materialistic and twisting their minds into pretzels to try to be sophisticated. See, it has nothing to do with philosophical depth at all. This is philosophical depth. Only he doesn't go as far as he could. Now, again, whether that's because he isn't quite ready to go where Abby's been teaching him, or whether by this time he understands it, but he doesn't quite want to go that far in a public newspaper, isn't totally clear to me. I know that he got this understanding later. Whether he had it when Abby was still alive in 1839, I don't know. I do know that we're talking October 5, 1839, Abby, I think, was already or was very soon to start displaying the signs of consumption, of tuberculosis, which means spitting up red blood, I think, and things like that. It wasn't very far away. I think she went for several months convalescing somewhere. I think it was her family's native Guadeloupe, but I'm not sure. For several months, because there's a poem Matthew wrote missing her, which is titled To Abby, and it's signed M, so there's no question what it is and whose it is. It's like it's been several months that she's been away. And I think from other clues, I think that her first cousin, Charles Poyen, who introduced mesmerism or hypnosis to America in 1834, I think he's the one that tended her. He intended to go on to Paris and get training to be a doctor, but he also died of consumption. They're probably caught from her, quite possibly. There is a little eulogy by Matthew signed with his own initials of Charles Poyen in the Portland transcript. And he mentions that Charles Poyen stayed with them in Portland for a period of time. So, it's very interesting what view of history you get from different sources. I found yesterday a paper that was written by someone about Matthew's employer and friend, Nathan Winslow. I shared a letter that Matthew wrote out for Nathan Winslow early on in this series. Well, she did a whole little biographical sketch about Nathan Winslow and his family. And Matthew doesn't come into it at all. At the point where Matthew was involved with him, all he says is that he sold his business, his stove business, to a partner. Well, I don't think he sold it to his partner. I think he sold it to his partner's cousin because they had the same name. I've looked into this and it's very confusing. And the only thing that makes sense is that Nathan Winslow had a business partner named Hugh Montgomery, but when the business failed, there was a Hugh Montgomery that came over from Ireland who probably was related, and he came over with a bunch of money and wanted to start a business, and Matthew teamed up with him because the new Hugh Montgomery had the money and Matthew had the expertise and the bookkeeping skills and so on. And one of the things Matthew says is that the bookkeeping was a tangled mess. Well, none of that is in the biography of Nathan Winslow. See, apparently he had money, but he really wasn't that good a businessman. Because he kept starting businesses and then folding. And, Matthew kept working for him periodically in different businesses over the years when he needed to. So, similarly, when you study the Portland transcript, you don't see any of this. And when you study the Dial, the Transcendentalist magazine, you don't see any of Matthew in there signing as an F. And when you study the New York Tribune from the fall of 1844 to middle 1846, you don't see anything of Matthew being the one writing as the star, So I guess it's hard to get everything, and then your assumptions lead you astray. But this article signed by a star, that's Matthew. That's the same person who was writing in the Dial. It's the same person who was writing as the star in the New York Tribune. And those things are famous, but they just haven't been attributed to the right person. So this was a deep philosopher, but a totally hidden philosopher. And behind him was Abby. See, and Abby was the real brains of the outfit and the really deep philosopher of the two, because she was not just a philosopher, she was a mystic, a real mystic. And she was teaching him, and then he, as a philosopher, would present as much of her teachings as he understood. So we will see who reads Real Paranormal Magazine UK. Now, I'll put this at the end because I really didn't want to open with it, but I'll say for you few who watch this that the person responsible for putting together the magazine is, and I really have to pause to think of how to say this, he's not doing it justice in terms of the formatting, because we have paragraphs all run together, strung together. We have subheadings that are not bold and just run into the text, where there's indented quotes. They're either run into the text or they're just centered instead of indented. I don't know if that's some technical issue that he hadn't figured out how to indent, blocks of type, and has to center them. But it's almost unreadable, I would have to say. Now, I have asked the editor to please see to it, even though it's been published, and he has said that he would. If he does, then all well and good. If he never gets to it and never reformats it properly, I probably will have to withdraw from Real Paranormal Magazine UK. It's okay with me that they're in a somewhat different area than what I normally would publish in. It's okay with me that it's sensational. It's even okay with me that they're really focusing on, things that go bump in the night, But if they can't format it to where it's readable, then, the only benefit of the thing is that it is technically, I can say it's published. Other than that, there's really no benefit if people can't read it. So that's a real problem. I have to wait and see what they do with it. I think it's beyond trying to be avant-garde, because you have to be able to read the copy. There's certain basic things, like a line that you just can't cross, and that's whether the type has to be readable. So we'll see. If they don't, say, by the time I post A Christmas Carol on Academia EDU in a month, if they haven't fixed the type, or even sooner than that, and they never do it, then I will then be free to just go ahead and post the other articles about Edgar Allan Poe and the Raven, about Margaret Fuller, and about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And I'll just post them on Academia EDU, unpublished, meaning they've never been in any journal. And I'll just start sending emails to those experts. I don't intend to submit these things to any journals. And the reason is that the experts whom I write to individually never take it seriously. Well, these are the referees. That's the pool that the referees are drawn from. And if I write personally to the referees and they won't take me seriously, there's no way that they're going to recommend that the article be published. But then on the downside, you can't submit to more than one journal at a time. That is very poor. That's considered unethical, actually. I looked it up just to check, and that's not permitted. So you have to submit to one journal. You have to wait and wait and wait and wait. I don't know how long, but it could be 6 weeks before they reject it. And they will reject it, So then you're supposed to submit to another journal. In other words, you could go all year submitting to 10 or 12 different journals, get rejected, and you've tied yourself up for a whole year for nothing. See, and since I already know it's going to be rejected by these people, because it deeply offends them, it's, and I don't have any credentials, So there's no point in submitting these things to journals, as I've been advised to do on occasion. So I'll just put it on Academia EDU, write people emails, tell them about it, use the search functions on Academia EDU itself, invite people to look at it and so on, and go from there. So I would like to see Real Paranormal Magazine presented properly formatted. That's what I hope will happen. That's what I've been told will happen. And we will see about that. I'll keep you guys posted on what I'm doing there. And so now I'm going to go ahead and get this thing edited. I'm going to leave in all but one or two of these mistakes that I made. So I'm not going to have 8-10 hours of editing like I've been doing with poetry. And we shall see. It's starting to get warm out there. When spring hits, I will go out to Evergreen Cemetery and introduce you to the buried bodies of people who were in Matthew's life, including Charles Isley, the editor of this paper during this time. He's out there. And Nathan Winslow, and Matthew's second wife, and two of his children, Abby's older sister, a niece of hers. So there's the later editor for the Portland Transcript, Edward Elwell, is out there too. Unfortunately, we can't talk to them, but it's kind of interesting nonetheless. Thank you for watching.